Hi, welcome to the Sales Strategies for Christian Coaches podcast. I'm Justin Janowski, your host, and I started my business in December of 2018, just hoping to make it as a Christian coach. God provided beyond what I could have imagined. I collected over $250,000 that first year, and I learned a lot about how to design a business, how to price offers, how to overcome resistance to ourselves and our own identity, resistance to sales, resistance to money, and how to sell in a high integrity, loving way that also converts at a high level. That's what we do now on this podcast and in our business is we help other Christian coaches build their businesses and accomplish their financial and entrepreneurial dreams with impact. And today I've got a very special guest on the podcast, Mr. Albert Pellissier, who's one of the first coaches that we ever worked with. Albert, I met years ago at another entrepreneurs event. Michelle Villalobos was running an event for female entrepreneurs primarily. Albert was like the unique guy in the crowd who was like the masculine force that they all loved being around. He was a true leader in that culture. And I was brought in to support sales at that event. Albert and I got to know each other. And later he came to our first retreat. And I know Albert, by the way, as somebody who's great at helping people accomplish their goals and their dreams. He's long run a cool program called Man Camp and helped men, specifically in Louisiana, come into retreats that are life-changing and transformational in a way that makes their dreams more possible. And when he came to our retreat, I'll never forget it. I made an offer at that Christian Coaches Retreat for, I think, a $12,500 program. It was the most expensive offer I'd ever made. I was nervous making it. And when I completed the offer, Albert threw his arms in the air and said, "I'm in." And it was the most encouraging yes moment. He did that in front of everybody that I've ever had. He told me I left a lot of money on the table, really encouraged me. I loved working with Albert. He had his biggest year ever when he started working with us, $90,000 in revenue. He's a great dad. He's a great investor. He's a great husband, just a great person. And he's recently written a book called What's on Your Backburner. Albert's going to be oh, there it is. It's a beautiful cover. Albert's going to be, if you're only listening to audio, just trust me. It's a beautiful cover, but you can go to backburnerbook.com to find it yourself. It's a bestseller already, doing really well. And Albert is sponsoring our summer conference, CCA Live, June 18th through 2025. He's going to be speaking for a full hour there. So if you want more Albert, you're going to get more Albert. But today, I want to welcome him to the show. Thanks for joining us, Albert.
Thanks for having me, Justin. Been looking forward to it, actually.
Tell us more about the book and the inspiration behind the book and what the book is doing for people right now. What's on your back burner? Using dormant desire to relight your fire.
Well, you in your intro, you really mentioned it a bunch of times. It's resistance, right? Overcoming resistance. So, if you think about it, everything you're doing, you're really trying to connect Christian coaches with their purpose in life, right? And so, what gets in the way of that? And the way you're solving their problem is by helping them get over their sales challenges and the resistance to sales, the resistance to receiving money. That's the reason I ended up in that retreat with you in the first place. And that's the reason I stood up and said yes. I knew I needed that. I knew I was having resistance around it. And the What's on Your Back Burner book, really it's about living your purpose when you get down to it. But it's about discovering what's in the way of that purpose that you're not aware of. And that's really, I'm giving a practical step-by-step. It's a 3-step solution to discover what's getting in your way. And I promise you never know what it is. It's always something that you're not aware of. And so in the first step, you increase your awareness. You realize in 15, 20 minutes. And that's what I'm going to do at the conference this summer. I'm going to take people through the first step where it's a simple exercise. It only takes 20 minutes, but usually people are holding their head in their hand or, sometimes they're crying, if the realization like, oh my, I can't believe this is what it's been all along. Mm. And so I love being there in that moment when people wake up to, the real reason they resist essentially answering the call. And I know once they see it, they're on the road to saying, you know what, I'm not going to let this stop me anymore. So
Yes.
this is
Oh, man.
yeah, it's just a practical application to overcoming the resistance to answering the call.
Yes. Overcoming the resistance to answering the call. And for me, what I've always told people, and I know to be true, is awareness is the first step to transformation.
It
And so
is.
you're talking about that in your first step. If you can just help people become aware of the resistance they have, because the truth is, if you're a Christian coach or an entrepreneur listening to this, and you're not achieving the fullness of your goals yet, it's almost always because you've got some kind of internal resistance that's preventing you from taking the necessary action or believing the necessary things or showing up as the version of you who can actually achieve that result. And so if you're listening and you know this is you, you want to even just take a first step towards transformation right now, just pause, or will pause for a moment and just declare for yourself, I have some resistance that I need to get rid of to clear the path to my goal. Okay, we're still here. But I want people to be able to consider that. So Albert, okay, let's say they recognize and get an awareness of the resistance. I know you're going to go through a whole process with us in an hour at the conference. But what's a next practical step people can take to relight their fire at some point in this process?
You can't relight the fire until you know what that internal conflict is.
Hmm,
So, just to bring up the example of myself, do you remember at that retreat,
I do.
my internal conflict was I felt like when I was selling what I knew was a good thing for people, to come to my retreat, I knew they would leave, better people with less resistance moving forward. But it was really just sales avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
And in your retreat, we came down to the line where I just had an inner belief that when I sold something to someone, that I was taking food off of their table.
Mm-hmm.
And you led me through essentially an exercise where you made me answer, is this really true? And you took me step by step. And of course it's not true. Yes, you're charging for whatever it is you're enrolling people in, but if you believe that it's a good value of what you're providing, then you're helping them. But the internal conflict for me in that case was, on the one hand, I know I have something amazing to deliver, and on the other hand, I had an inner belief that I was unaware of. It was subconscious, that by selling this and taking money from the people, that I'm actually diminishing them in some capacity, because now they don't have the money that they spent on my program. And so whenever you have an internal conflict, the subconscious part will always win, and that's really the problem. Like, you can do all kinds of stuff and have good habits, and put your to-do list on there, and you can exert your will, but until you uncover this internal conflict, this belief that's no longer true or was never true, you're not going to do it, Justin.
Yeah.
You're just not. So the fire really is there, and that's why I say relight the fire. If you know what your calling is, it probably nags on you. I name the book "What's on Your Back Burner." You have projects and ideas and goals and desires that have been haunting you for years or months or decades even. It's there. So the fire doesn't go out. So in one sense, relit is a little bit of a misnomer. It's really just turning up the heat on that fire that's still there. It's just stoking that flame that's already exists inside of you. But in order to do it, you've got to come to grips that this internal conflict has to be resolved. Otherwise, you're spinning your wheels.
Yeah, when you turn up the heat on the fire and the internal conflict, it's almost like there's a cover that's like snuffing out the fire. The fire needs oxygen
It does.
to grow, and so we need to take that cover off. And so for you, you had this old story. When I make a sale, I'm taking food off of people's table. I remember, I'll never forget that conversation we had in front of everybody at the retreat. Do you remember, after that retreat, you overcame the story? You realized that, like, when people came to your retreat, they oftentimes actually earned more money. They provided for their family in a better way. They were able to be more generous with the people around them. The story you ultimately came to is that when people buy your retreat they actually put more and better food on their table.
Yeah, right.
You're not taking food off of the table. You're actually adding food, and it smells better. It looks better. And like once you were free from that old story, that old resistance, that you had that new awareness, you had a $90,000 year. Do you remember what you did in sales the year before, roughly, in your coaching business?
Oh, I mean, maybe under 10.
Yeah.
It was nothing. It was non-existent practically. I had had a few retreats, but I didn't have any sort of a mastermind program to sell people into,
Yeah.
and yeah, it wasn't much.
This is so helpful. Thank you for just sharing this on the podcast. I know that we've got some podcast listeners that are running multiple six-figure businesses. We've got some listeners around 100,000. We've got some at 50. But I would guess that 80% or more of our podcast listeners here are between 0 and $10,000 in annual revenue. Their business is new. They're trying to figure it out. That's why they're learning. That's why they're listening. Listen to this. Albert Pellissier was under $10,000 in annual revenue. Had one sticky story that caused tremendous resistance to sales and necessary action. Changed the story. Yes, he got some strong strategies. He worked with us. He invested in himself. But the biggest catalyst, I believe, was removing that old story, instilling a new empowering story. And once the resistance was gone, he went from under 10,000 to 90,000 in 1 year. And this is the kind of support that you can get when you read Albert's book, when you gain a new awareness, when you hire your coach. Maybe it's Albert. Maybe you need to come to our conference, CCA Live, get this experience with Albert, and you can leave resistance free, lighter, free, and ready to move into action. Albert, what's it like when the resistance goes away and you get to pursue your goal without a cover on top?
I'm going to be honest. It doesn't mean that you're not scared.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you might think, oh yeah, okay, now I launch into this new space and I'm fearless. That's totally not true. So, I left your retreat and armed with my new information, sort of my replacement belief there in place of the one that wasn't true. And it was less than 60 days later. I was having my own retreat, and I limited to 8 men, so there were 8 men showing up for that retreat. I had to sell them on the entry price there. But the thing that was missing in the past was, extending another offer to them on Saturday night to continue on with me and work with me for a year. And I was terrified. I was like, I can't be in Justin's group and not make this offer. But there was so much of a big part of me that just wanted to find a way to skip it, or
Right.
get distracted with other things. And we ran out of time, and I don't have time to make the big offer. And so, but I just knew in good conscience that I had to do it. But literally, I was terrified. So I got up, I made my pitch. No one did jump up and, and say, "I'll take it," which I can see how that would be nice.
That's rare, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're one of the few who've ever done that, by the way. So I want to be clear, people shouldn't have that expectation, but it's cool when it happens.
And then, as part of what you taught me to do once I made the offers, to essentially take each person aside one by one and just have a conversation with them and see if it was a good fit. Now, 6 of the 8 people said yes.
Wow.
And so that one weekend, between the price of coming, which was about $1,250 to come to the retreat, and then another 7,000, there was a lower price package for 5,000. Essentially, by Sunday, I had booked $42,000 in business. So that was really almost half the annual total. All came from that initial group. And as the year went on, I had another retreat and I added more people to it, and that's how I ended up getting to the 95,000. But that was $95,000 in business with only 13 people.
Wow.
It,
Incredible. So you were
it's
still
not,
able to have a lifestyle.
yeah, it wasn't like I had 100 clients. It
Right.
was just 13 people to various degrees, either buying a seat to a retreat or doing some sort of what I think is a pretty reasonable package, 5 to 7,000. But
Yeah.
it added up, and most of those people ended up going on to work with me for another year after that. And but it was really just having the courage to make that offer. And look, honestly, I wouldn't have come to that on my own. I mean, there was pressure in the sense that I was in your sales training and I didn't want to show up again, on the next call the following week
Mm.
and, have to admit that I lost my nerve and didn't make the offer.
Yeah.
And so, how does it feel? It driving home, from that retreat, realizing I had booked so much business. Here was the weird thing. I remember thinking that the money really didn't matter
Hmm.
as much as I thought it would. Now it's my highest, one weekend, sales total, but it really didn't mean nearly as much to me. I wasn't like over the top about the money. I really felt good of just enrolling these guys in being able to support them for another year, and just imagine what that was going to be like for them.
Yeah.
It really wasn't that much money in the sense of what they were spending, of what they were going to get for a year. So that was the money part was really brief. And then I'm just sort of settled in and became, oh, okay, well, this is, and of course, once you do it once, it's a lot easier the
Yeah.
second time.
Yeah.
Um, and look, the very next retreat, I had 8 more people there, and I think only 2 of the 8, signed up for the year. So again, I wasn't disappointed either. It was still a hell of a weekend. That was,
Yeah.
um, 10,000 plus maybe another 10. So somewhere around a $20,000
Yeah.
weekend. Not bad.
Yeah.
But
Not a bad
again,
weekend.
the disappointment wasn't there either, that it was only
Right.
2. In other words, I really just got to the point where I just do my part, which
Yes.
is to bring value and just deliver it and just show up. And then whoever it's for can say yes. And if
Yeah.
it's not for them, it's not for them. And that's okay too.
That's
And
exactly
so,
right. That's what we believe is our job is just to make it as easy as possible for the right people to say yes. I know you're impact motivated and the vast majority of our listeners, like they care way more about the impact than the income. But what I want you to learn from Albert here is like he had a little bit of healthy pressure. For him, it was that he was in our group and he wanted to show up and like be accountable to making the offer he told everyone he was going to make. Sometimes being in a group and having community or a coach or a mentor, that sort of thing can really help. For other people, I remember for me, I felt a healthy amount of pressure when I started because I did need the income or I was going to go out of business and have to go get a job. Like, but we all have different scenarios and like finding a way to create a healthy amount of pressure to follow through, I think is really nice. Too much pressure, not so good. It can be debilitating, but a little bit of pressure or accountability to ourselves is important. And the cool thing about it not being about the money for you was that those men spending that money was a representation of their commitment to their transformation and to solving the problem. And I know that there was a tremendous impact that came on the back end of that. And I just want to commend you for your courage and the work that you've done. And like, I mean, Albert's spoken at our retreats in the past and I've seen you in action and you are an incredible transformation creator. And I'm so excited to have you come to our conference and help create transformation with us. What I'm receiving from Albert is we need to remove the resistance. This is what he's going to help people do at the conference. We need to be very clear on what we want. And then we just need to take the aligned action. Even when it's scary, we need to do it scared and make it as easy as possible for the right people to say yes. We're going to wrap up here in a second. And if you want more, grab Albert's book, backburnerbook.com, and come to our conference, www.f2itribe.com/CCA Live. F2itribe.com/CCA Live. Sign up for the conference. Come join us in Milwaukee. It's going to be an amazing experience with great guests. We're going to teach you how to sell more, how to grow your business through great marketing. Albert's going to help you remove resistance and achieve your goals. Albert, before we wrap, a final word, a final thought, something else the audience needs.
it is accountability, and and look, not for them personally, but their clients, the people they're selling to, need the accountability. And this is something I've had to learn over and over and over again. When you give yourself away for free or nothing or too little, the people just don't buy in. Your clients don't buy in, and they're not going to do the work. And
Mhm.
so, uh, if it's a money consciousness issue, like it was for me when you're selling, you really do have to make that ultimate shift, which is to realize when you charge someone something that they like an amount of money that is significant to them, it's almost the only way they're actually going to do the work.
Mm. Yeah, it really matters. That's what I've known to be true is the more I charge, the more a client shows up. The more I charge, the more the client implements. The more I charge, the more leverage and accountability they have to take massive action and get the result that they're paying for in the first place. I've had lower price programs, and some people get a lot out of those things, but there are plenty of people in the lower price programs who just don't show up, who don't do the work, who don't implement because the cost, the opportunity cost isn't high enough. And
Right.
when the price is higher, people show up in a different way and they take it more seriously.
It's true. And I'm sorry that I have to learn that lesson over and over and over again. But I've come to know it's 100% true.
Oh, so good. Thank you, Albert. This has been awesome. Join us at the summer conference for more Albert Pellissier, www.f2itribe.com/CCA live. See you there.